Hi everybody, it's Franny, and I wanted to do a quick follow-up episode to the episode I did about Sam Crac's i8, and since then he has released his episode where he actually pulled the engine out of the car. That was awesome, so if you haven't seen that, I'm going to go ahead and link that down below. Go ahead and check that out because this is going to reference some of that. So what I want to do is respond to a couple of things that came through on my last video, and then I want to talk about Sam's car, and more importantly, how we could prevent that in the future. A quick refresher on the car. Sam's car is a 2014, ours is a 2015 BMW i8. The engine is a midship, it's a mid-engined. It's a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder turbocharged engine. It's a dual scroll turbo, but it's a single turbo. Interesting engine, puts out about 228 horsepower, and importantly, it is very different than the i3. The i3's engine, if it comes with one, is a range extender. It's really basically just a generator. On this car, it actually goes through a 6-speed transmission and drives the rear wheel, so it's a propulsion engine, and that's kind of important. Sam bought his car off auction. It had 2 previous owners, according to the Carfax, and kind of had changed hands a bit, and also had been through a lot of sort of dealers and service stations and things. And it looked like from the early Carfax that the car was pretty well taken care of. It was in for its service and on time, and everything seemed to get done. At one point there was something kind of strange about the gas tank being removed and then refitted. I can't think that there would be fuel problems, although they did check the pump pressure as well, thinking maybe the car sat for a while. That's the only thing I can think of, and maybe they just wanted to clean out the tank. That was kind of weird. But at any rate, moving along, it just had its service done, and then changed hands. And then all of a sudden, it kind of got into a bad place. The car was repossessed, and right about that time, there was some front end damage. Now, going back to Sam's video, if you look at the rear crash bar on the car on the right side, you'll see it's kind of smooshed in on the top there too. So the Carfax isn't telling all the stories, would be my guess. So that's important because there could be other things that, of course, we don't know about in its service history. After the repossession, the car was repurchased, sold again. I think that's probably when the problems started to happen, when we had these overheating issues that were going on in the car. And my guess is kind of what happened was when the car was received and then went through dealers because it was having these overheating problems, I'll bet you the car was getting hot rodded a bit and people would get a little too far away and the car got overheated and they had to get the car back, so they ended up driving the car when it was way too hot. Now, I know that these cars will run out of electrical power unless they're really plugged in or they've been run around on sport quite a bit. So when we bought our car, the battery was pretty much dead in it, which was kind of weird. So it was all fussing at us and told us that we had to put it in sport and everything. We had to put gas in it. And so that's kind of the condition I expect the car was when it was sold. And I think that's really important because that kind of speaks to how the car was treated. And I don't think it was treated very well at all. And then when Sam got the car, he drove it very gingerly and it overheated pretty much right away, but he wasn't far enough away from home that he damaged the car anymore getting it back. All right, fast forwarding, Sam's got the engine out of the car at the shop. The boys did a great job. Incidentally, it was kind of interesting. It only took maybe, 4 to 6 hours? It really wasn't that bad to drop the engine out of the bottom of that car. I was surprised. That was pretty neat. Kind of makes sense. The cars are pretty modular in the way they're constructed, so it just all came out as one assembly, that whole rear end. When Sam was able to take everything off the top of the engine, they pulled the head off, they took it to the machine shop, and lo and behold, it was pretty warped. Pretty badly warped. The gasket was pretty destroyed. So the top end of the engine is kind of a mess. The big question is, what does the bottom of the engine look like? What's the block look like? Is it warped? Is it bent? Also, we've got 3 pistons in there, 3 cylinders, we've got a crankshaft, we've got all sorts of other stuff in there that needs that block not to be warped. So I don't know, hopefully they can throw a straight edge over the top of that thing and all the corners and check it and make sure it's still within spec. BMW does have a spec for this. As long as the block is within spec, it should be fine. Now remember, Sam was driving this car and it didn't smoke, it didn't do anything crazy, it seemed to make power, everything seemed to be operating just fine. So my guess is that the bottom half of the engine, the block, is in good shape. It's just that head that's kind of a mess. Well, all right, well, what do you do moving forward from here? Well, a new head is somewhere around $2,000-ish, I think, and you'd have to have it shipped from Germany. You can get a short block for about $8,000, and that would have the bottom end and the head on it. So that's a possibility, but quite a bit more expensive. And then I did see a used engine. You might be able to do better than this, but I saw a used engine it has to be for an i8, not for a Mini. The heads are different. So I saw one for about $5,000, and I don't know. I mean, it's a possibility. It's a very nice car, and Sam got a pretty good deal on it, so he's not going to be, doing super well on it, but if he has to, he can always put a used engine in it as well. I think one thing that Sam probably should do is go ahead and recheck for any coolant in the oil. I think that could be a thing. If the head gasket was as destroyed as it looked, boy, it could have coolant anywhere in that engine, huh? So probably a good idea to go through and flush it once they're done putting it all back together. One thing I'm very curious about is how the engine got so damaged in the first place. So the computer on the car is taking a look at that temperature all the time, and as you start the car and it's cold, it's going to, obviously all cars do this, they'll recirculate the coolant in the engine until it gets to about 105 degrees, and then the thermostat opens up so it can start pumping the water up to the radiator to be cooled. Then it allows the car to kind of warm up, and it's interesting. It moves between a few different temperatures based on the load and how you're using the engine. If you want it very efficient, it actually raises the temperature a bit, and if you're pulling tons of power out of the engine, because this is a direct injection engine, it lowers the temperature to reduce knock, and that's a pretty neat feature. But the problem is when the engine temperature rises up to about 117 degrees C, and we saw that in Sam's video, all of a sudden it puts up that warning. Well, at that point, between that point, 117 and 124 degrees Celsius, the computer will start shutting down some of the auxiliary stuff in the car, mainly the air conditioning and HVAC. And the idea is we want as much cooling as possible, and we don't want to be flowing hot air over the air conditioning system onto the cooling radiator. If the temperature rises up to 125 and then continues on up, then it gets more serious. It goes into kind of DEFCON 2, and it starts shutting down the power of the engine. And if the temperature gets high enough, it will shut it down as much as 90%, which that is serious limp mode trying to get home. So how could it get so hot to cause all that damage? And the only thing I can think of is that it was hot rodded so hard that the temperature went up so fast that the engine management just couldn't keep up with it. I mean, as much as it tried. And the cooling system wasn't working, obviously. We had either air in the coolant system or we had a bad pump. In the Carfax, it also says that the pump had been replaced. If those impeller had been melted and kind of screwed up, then it wasn't flowing water through as well. All sorts of problems. So I'm thinking that's probably how all the damage really occurred on the engine. So I think reading through the Carfax and all the information Sam had, there's really no way he could have known that it was that damaged. There was nothing on the Carfax that said, oh, they've run a block test like we did and Sam did. It would be really, really hard for Sam to have known. So I think really what caused all this problem was just flat out abuse. And I think if you're going to buy a car and you're going to buy one of these used, the problem is that people think that this is actually a supercar, and as much as I'd love it to be a supercar, it really kind of isn't, mostly because it just doesn't have the power for it. I think for a supercar you need to be somewhere around 600-700 horsepower, and this is very low compared to that. It's less than 400. It has a decent 0 to 60 time, it's reasonably fast, it's got carbon fiber, it's got the crazy doors and all that other stuff, but really what this car is a GT car. It's not meant to be hot rodded around, it's not meant to be driven around in a track, it's really supposed to be driven to work and back and maybe trips and things. That's really what it's for. But I think people have a little different conception of the car, and I think they're just kind of beating on these poor cars a little bit too much. So if you're in the market for one of these cars, I would suggest a full PPI on the car, and they want to check everything, go through the computer's history. The history in the computer should tell you how many times the thing overheated or how many faults that were thrown up from any of the other systems, air conditioning systems, the battery overheating, any of that sort of stuff that would really be a serious problem should all be squirreled away in that computer, unless of course somebody has wiped it clean. So hopefully that hasn't happened. So I think the final conclusion is that there's nothing particularly wrong with BMW i8s. There's not any systemic problem with them. I think poor Sam's car just got kind of beaten up a lot. It went through a lot of people, and I think it was hot rodded. I think it was abused. And once that head gasket went, boy, it just caused a huge number of problems. But that's okay. Sam has that engine out. He's going to deal with that head. Whether he replaces it. I mean, there's a couple of possible things he could do to try and get that head to work, but it might be a little too far gone. So a replacement head might be all that it really needs. And then you can put it back together, put the engine in the car, and he's got a great running BMW i8. It's going to be super awesome for him. I'd like to ask what you guys think. What do you think Sam should do next on his car? Do you think he needs a whole new engine, or do you think a new head would be enough? Or do you think he can salvage the head he's already got? A lot of questions there. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. I'm really interested in what everybody has to say about that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll get right to them. We're also working on our Porsche 3.2 Carrera. It's a 1986. I'm working on the engine of that, getting that's back in the car, and we're trying to get that sorted as well. So we do quite a bit of work in our garage here on the different cars. So if you really enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe, hit the little bell next to it to be notified. All right, thanks again for watching, and as always, a very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.